Welcome, everyone, to the July 31st, 2025 Gaslit Nation Salon, where we are discussing Antoine Saint-Exupéry's Le Petit Prince, The Little Prince, written in exile in the United States in 1942 by the author, who at this time was a famous pilot and also a famous writer and was considered like a towering French intellectual forced into exile by the Nazi regime. France had fallen very quickly, so World War II breaks out thanks to the Nazis and the Soviets invading Poland together. The Nazis go first, the Soviets come in 2 weeks later. Britain and France declare war. This is September 1939. September 1939, and France falls in 1940. France falls in 1940. And then Pearl Harbor gets bombed in December 1941, dragging the US finally into war. But at the time that our author of the July 2025 Book of the Month Club pick, The Little Prince, remember, we're reading books all year to try to stay grounded in this larger spiritual, physical, practical struggle that we're all in against fascism again in the world, not just on US soil, not just the occupation of our White House by a Russian-backed tyrant, but obviously the larger global fascist war in a time of blazing disinformation, ignorance, apathy, nihilism, and so on. So how can the book, The Little Prince, wake us up today? What can it teach us? What can it remind us of? And obviously, for anyone that's read the book, it is considered a children's book, but it's hugely popular, translated into something like 250 languages around the world. It took off like wildfire for its very simple, magical parable lesson of a little boy around 6 years old who's the prince who comes across the author, the pilot, stranded in the desert with a simple request of draw me a mouton, draw me a sheep. And the pilot's like, I'm a pilot stranded in the desert. And where did you come from, child? And that begins their friendship. And the little prince explains that he came from a small little planet where his beloved rose is there growing. And he has an active volcano that he has to tend to. And he's also visited other planets where he's met a tyrant, a king who is so proud ruling over his planet, even though he's the only one there, but he's a tyrant and a king in his own mind. Sound familiar? And then you have the greedy businessman who just crunches numbers all day, and all human life, all existence comes down to his greedy little numbers. Sound familiar? So those are the forces we're up against, oligarchy and tyranny. And on it goes. And the whole message is social responsibility, empathy. We are responsible for each other. It doesn't matter that the rose, the chatty little rose, the diva rose on the little prince's planet is a bit feisty, comes with an attitude, has her certain way of wanting things done. The little prince loves her and cares for her. And in doing so, in creating community with her and mutual acceptance with his rose, that gives his life larger meaning. And so, what Antoine Saint-Exupéry are exacerbated extraordinarily in crisis, in a time of chaos for the world and himself personally. He's living in exile. And this time of the French resistance is completely fractured. We'll get into that more in a second. He's writing to us in this beautiful, haunting children's book saying that it doesn't matter how difficult we are. It doesn't matter our differences. It doesn't matter how much we annoy each other as we go through life, your husband, your wife, your neighbors, all those around you in your organizing group, your committee. It doesn't matter. There's a certain charm in the fact that we are holding community and holding relationship, and ultimately we need each other. Ultimately, we are responsible to each other. It's not that your life brings me value because your existence makes me more efficient. It makes me a rich, unstoppable tyrant. You're not a body for me to farm and turn into mindless profit. You exist with all your imperfections, and that's enough. You are enough. And I am responsible to you, and you are responsible to me. And that's enough. And he goes on with these haunting messages like this throughout the book. One of the most famous quotes is, "What is essential cannot be seen with the eye." Why is that so political of a statement? Because who he's ultimately calling out in a very delicate way, in a very beautiful, symbolic, timeless way with the Little Prince, is the soulless, shallow, ignorant, powerful America First movement on US soil, propped up and promoted by American Nazis like Charles Lindbergh and Henry Ford. This was an unstoppable movement that had control over the US Congress and basically had the Democratic president, FDR's hands tied in doing anything meaningful to join the fight to liberate Europe. During this time, you had Churchill, the Prime Minister of Great Britain, camping out at the White House, refusing to leave the White House, living at the White House. Think about that today. Could you imagine a head of state just coming to the White House and not leaving for several weeks? Just being, this is going to be like an indefinite slumber party of fighting Nazis. Like that's what Churchill did. Like, so this is what Churchill is so desperate to join forces with FDR against the all-empowering, omnipresent America First movement that's not just politically powerful, but also powerful in industry, powerful in media. Why was America First so powerful? Because Nazis, there was a big appeal of Nazis. Hitler was not afraid to call a spade, as one person I know described their affection towards Trump. Hitler was not afraid to call it like he saw it. Hitler was not afraid to go there and do what needed to be done and say what needed to be said. Unlike so many cautious, calculating politicians out there, Hitler was authentic and real to them. So he had a massive cult following, of course, even in the US, where you had Nazi camps, including in Long Island, New York, including in the Midwest. You had a lot of big time radio programs, including one by a well-known far-right Catholic priest who is, all that, the Tucker Carlsons of their day were going on with great sympathies and our shared Christian values with the Nazis and so on. And of course, you had famously the Nazis touring our US South to learn from our Jim Crow on how they can tighten the screws legally and creating legal warfare against oppressed minorities in Germany and further entrench Germany into a dictatorship and so on. So there was this beautiful, evil, beautiful in their minds, right? So just understand where they were coming from. There was this ripened culture between the American far-right conservative movement and the German far-right conservative movement. It was symbiotic. They were really, it's very much like MAGA and the Russians today. It was like a like-minded culture, shared interests. And this was the prevailing power of the day. And so Antoine Saint-Exupéry is stuck in New York. Where else is he going to go? Hitler is marching across Europe. Whatever Hitler's not gobbling up, Stalin is taking. Up until the point Hitler, a madman, turns on his partner, Stalin, another madman, and those madmen go to war. But up until this point, the Nazis and Soviets are just gobbling up most of Europe together. And so Europe, by and large, is an extremely dangerous place, and it's only a matter of time before they conquer Great Britain as well, where the French resistance is holed up in London under General Charles de Gaulle, and we'll get to him later. But so Antoine Saint-Exupéry is dreaming big for himself, for his country. He's married to an extremely proud feminist, ahead of her time, twice divorced, a journalist, artist, writer from El Salvador by the name of Consuela. That is his wife. She is the Rose in The Little Prince, that feisty diva of a rose. That is her. But the rose is also believed to be his love for France, because France he felt was full of vanity and pride and had certain aspects to it that were very hard to unify. it's extremely important for us to understand in this moment of time where we're looking for a savior, we're looking for somebody that just seems to be the prevailing wisdom. I'm not speaking for myself, certainly, but I'm saying people are looking for who's going to step up in the midterm elections, who's going to help win us big in the midterm elections, who's going to take back Congress and really overcome the Jim Crow of today, overcome whatever other rat fucking that the Republicans might do to try to steal this election. Who will be our saviors in the upcoming midterms? Then who will be our saviors in the 2028 election? Who will be the front runner to really unite the opposition, the liberals and the progressives, everybody across the spectrum, the independents, to ensure that we vote in such large numbers that the Republicans can't even steal it in 2028? Who will be that person? It seems that the French, in the French resistance and all the romantic ideas we have about it, Casablanca, the singing of the French national anthem, Le Marseillaise, and the Casablanca film, like we have all these romantic notions that the French resistance, the resistance of the Nazis in the past, were some well-oiled machine of superheroes that rose up and sacrificed their lives proudly and did what had to be done. It was not like that. The French resistance at this time was a hot mess that hated each other. And that should bring us a lot of comfort today. They hated each other. Charles de Gaulle, General de Gaulle in London, was considered a polarizing figure when he declared resistance in London. He announced it with a statement called Letter from London or something like that, saying like, take up arms, join forces, we must fight. No one really paid attention. And having run Gaslit Nation as long as I have, having been ahead of the news as long as I have, and having laid it all out there as long as I have, that was very comforting to be like, they ignored de Gaulle too. They ignored his warnings too. So de Gaulle was seen as eccentric in the sense of like naive, like he was daring to fight, whereas the conventional wisdom of the day, titans of industry, political titans, even US political chambers, as I mentioned, even FDR was looking to the Vichy French, the collaborators. The Vichy was the government that remained in France, that took over France and collaborated openly and proudly with the Germans under their argument of this is the new reality. Why fight it? We should work together. A lot of what people say today about Russia, Putin's fascist state, exact same rhetoric as the Vichy. And so the Vichy were taken extremely seriously. Like de Gaulle, the leader of the French resistance based in London, not taken seriously. That's extremely important for all of us to be reminded of and to hold on to in the greater context of what is happening in this moment of time. And again, I'm talking during some of the darkest hours of World War II, where London is being brutally blitzed by the Nazis, by Hitler's blitzkrieg, just constant bombs, night after night, just like Ukraine today. And then you have America first isolationism. Why should we care about the Europeans? That's not our war. What has Hitler ever done to us? He's not so bad. We should work with him. We should not disrupt our profits and what's good for American industry. He's not so bad. That was the power of the United States of America. That was Congress. That was Congress. And the Supreme Court, to a certain extent, that was trying to curb FDR in so many ways. And so Antoine Saint-Exupéry is just, he doesn't see a home anywhere. He doesn't trust de Gaulle. That's important. He did not trust de Gaulle, just to show you how isolated de Gaulle was, how desperate de Gaulle's own situation was. Antoine Saint-Exupéry looked at de Gaulle as a propagandist, a nationalist, somebody that had his own authoritarian leanings because he was very controlling. Like, we have to do things this way or else. Like, everyone follow me. I am the leader. You get behind me. We're going to fight. This is how we're going to do it. Impossible to control. Churchill didn't know what to do with him. Churchill appreciated his fight and his fire, but was like, you're kind of out of control. You're kind of your own little element here. I don't know. So de Gaulle was in his own wilderness. And so as much as the French resistance through de Gaulle would have loved to work with someone like Antoine Saint-Exupéry and hold him up as an icon, a French icon of resistance and an extension of their voice of resistance in the world and an advocate for their cause. They didn't trust each other. They didn't like each other. They did not work together. That's very important for us to sit with today because look around you. Do you really see a united front of resistance against Trump on the US soil? You see a lot of different groups doing what they can, but there's not a lot of overarching organization politically. There's just groups and they don't all talk to each other. They don't all work together. And that includes opposition leaders by and large. And so it's just sort of a lot of people doing their own thing and sometimes sniping at each other, subtweeting each other on social media. It's very much what the sort of despondent state that our own resistance is in. And that's why I'm really stressing this point for us to not, feel bad because what ultimately ends up happening as fractured as the resistance is, and there's also a lot of blowback. This is important, where de Gaulle, his forces, his movement is seen as extreme. And every time they get any success behind enemy lines in occupied France, and there's movement by the resistance, the Germans come back with total cruelty, like lining up resistance fighters and their families, suspected fighters, lining them up exterminating them before everyone to see, before the eyes of the village, just cruelly mass murdering people in their beds in villages. And so the French on occupied soil under the Germans resented the French resistance, resented them, saying, "You're getting us killed. You're heightening the terror that we're already living with by all your crazy operations that aren't going to go anywhere, that are useless." And so the whole matter of a French resistance felt completely hopeless. And it didn't really turn around until the Americans, by and large, officially entered the war. And you had American soldiers and you had D-Day. And then de Gaulle really became necessary with getting, providing some leverage wherever he could with his French resistance networks for D-Day and beyond and the liberation of Paris. And that's what left us ultimately with this growing legacy of the French resistance being the saviors, part of this, part of the crew, the coalition that would ultimately liberate Europe. And then de Gaulle would go on to lead France and make sure that France had a strong military, make sure that France was a nuclear power. That's significant because France today, under Macron, is leading a resistance against fascism, once again, against Putin. Macron is one of the, France generally is one of the bravest supporters of Ukraine in Western Europe and saying we need to be doing more. We need to be sending, just up. This is our war too, and speaking passionately about this. And that is a history that goes back to de Gaulle, because what de Gaulle left his people with, part of his legacy, his message to the French was do not count on the Americans. We, as France, must be a nuclear power because American isolationism, America first, it's evil. It's an evil terror against the global community. And in fact, Antoine Saint-Exupéry and de Gaulle spiritually, morally agreed with that statement. They both wrote it. They both talked about it, saying that silence is complicity. Refusing to do anything ultimately just aids the enemy. Not voting is voting, right? And so that was the statement. It's like you have to take sides. In a war against evil, you have to take sides. And if you insist on staying neutral, you're taking the side of evil. And so, in order to ensure a legacy for the security of France, de Gaulle said, we are going to be a nuclear power. We're going to have a strong military. We're always going to be ready and able to fight our own fights. And now, today, France is leading the fight against Russian fascism. So, in terms of The Little Prince, the book is seen as a reminder of our shared oneness, our global humanity, our community, the power of faith, the power in believing that your life, your human rights, that's enough. That itself has an intrinsic value, and you're enough, and that's enough. And it is seeing ourselves and each other with that childlike wonder, with that childlike innocence, that itself is a superpower that is going to unlock the magic all around us and allow us to overcome the tired, old evil and stupidity that plagues the world. And so if you can stay in your superpower of self-love, of love for humanity, of love for community, and your innocence, you can overcome all of the painful indifference and greed and brutality and cruelty of the world. Just stay in your love, stay in your power, and by doing so, you're creating a beautiful community, a beautiful home that can overcome anything. And that's the power of faith, that's the power of resistance, and it's very much a message of resistance begins within. Resistance begins within. And it's also a reminder of the power of passion, caring deeply for love, for the relationships around us, for the causes, for country, because he kept saying in his interviews and when he was pressed, like, do you support de Gaulle? Do you support this? Like, are you Vichy? Are you this? And he's like, I'm nothing. I'm France. I'm for my country. I'm for the liberation of my country. And how his story ultimately ends, he writes Little Prince. He writes 30,000 words. I think that's double the size of what the actual book would become. The editors had to strip it down and really simplify it, but he had a lot to say with this book. He leaves the book in the hands of a team of women, editors and translators, who take it from there and make sure that the book says what needs to be said in this moment of time, not just for France, of course, but for the whole world. He had a brilliant French translator who understood how to capture the spirit of this book so that it would resonate with Americans who also needed to hear it. And he left the book in the hands of a brilliant team of women. And then he volunteered as a 43-year-old who quite old at that time. And in failing health, he volunteered to fly his plane in a reconnaissance mission for the French resistance backed by the Allies. He did not do this with General de Gaulle. He did this with the Allies that were officially united with the French resistance. He was working with them. And they asked him to fly over southern France, over the Mediterranean, over Marseille, to look for German movements there and report back. And the night he went out, on today, July 31st, 1944, the night he went out, he never came back. And in 1998, a fisherman off the coast of Marseille found a silver bracelet with his name on it that was believed to be from him. And years later, in the 2000s, a fisherman found what was believed to be the wreckage of his plane. So all of these signs point to that he was likely shot down or had engine failure, and his plane went down in the Mediterranean just off the coast of Marseille, which was under German occupation at the time. And 2 months later, Paris was liberated. And the following spring, war would be over in Europe. So he almost lived to see all that. It's pretty amazing that he didn't. It's pretty amazing that he just wrote The Little Prince and then went off to fight and give his life in the French resistance. And that's it. That's where his story ends. But he's left us this larger book, a short book, a powerful book to see ourselves in today.